Before we begin, can I ask one small favor? If you like the show and the conversations we're sharing, it would mean the world to me if you could subscribe to the show and follow along on whatever platform you're listening to this on. You may not know it, but by simply subscribing, you are helping us in a big way to continue creating and sharing our quiet conversations. Thank you so much. Now, onwards to the show.
There's 3 reasons why self-compassion helps you flourish and leads to more fulfillment. So if you're someone that can be a bit anxious or worried or concerned, try this one thing. Name it to tame it. You see, when you give a language to your emotional responses, it calms the fear center of the brain. In simple terms, self-esteem says, I love me when the world loves me. But self-compassion says, I love me unconditionally. The ego is a social mask we wear, and this gives us a sense of identity, but it's actually a mistaken identity. It's not the real truth of who we are, which is infinite, it's eternal, it's limitless. So, hi, my name is Dr. Nilesh Satguru, and I'm a self-mastery coach. I work with entrepreneurs and help them master their emotions with compassion.
This week on The Quiet Life, we're talking about mastering our emotions, how they work, how we can understand them, and how we can best navigate them in our everyday lives. And so I'm speaking to Dr. Nilesh Satguru, a self-mastery coach and compassion healer who spent the last decade practicing medicine. Now, Nilesh helps entrepreneurs awaken their own sense of self-mastery with compassion. Nilesh is a triple qualified medical doctor specializing in general practice, occupational medicine, and lifestyle medicine, and he was the director of the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine and has since become certified in high-performance coaching and geo-love healing. I'm so excited to share this conversation with you. Now, onwards to the show. Hi, Nilesh. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, obviously, you and I have known each other for a little bit. Through messaging, internet, through mutual work. So it's really great to have you in studio. And what I'd love to maybe start with is just to give a little context, because where I first was introduced to you was in your world as a GP, as a doctor. I don't even know if we met face to face, but I've always known your name because I obviously, as you know, have done work over the past years with Royal College of General Practitioners, worked with lifestyle medicine, and your name was always in that kind of pantheon of experts and leaders in that space. But obviously you're here and we're having a conversation in a different context. What was that world? What was that life? And what are you doing now?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that. Well, I loved being a doctor, and it was through a lot of personal challenges as a GP that I found lifestyle medicine, which is a specialty that treats chronic disease through lifestyle change. When I heard about that, after a while, I started to realize that whilst I was doing some work with companies and I was working on employees' well-being, that what happens if I worked with the business leaders? And I had this thought about this ripple effect that could be possible when you work with leaders, entrepreneurs, or founders in different organizations, and you help them master their emotions. What could be possible? And so that sort of moved me into working with entrepreneurs now.
And I think it's a really interesting journey, and this is purely from my perspective, because I suppose when you're a GP or a doctor, you're very left brain. It's very what the science says. It's what the evidence is, matter of fact. And where you are now, which is this beautiful transition towards perhaps the right brain or the sense or sensibility, was that a tough transition for you, or is that a natural place that you wanted to get to? Or was there kind of a chapter you had to say, I'm not doing the doctor work and I'm moving into a different space now?
Mm-hmm. So if there's one key message from this whole podcast, or, for life really, is that compassion helps integrate all parts of you. And this isn't just, my opinion is scientific fact. Connects the left part of the brain with the right part of the brain, front of the brain with the back of the brain, connects all parts of our personalities. So I was left logical, but as I discovered compassion, see, when I was a GP, I got a patient complaint. I can tell that story in more detail. And that helped me realize how uncompassionate I was with myself. And so that then led to this unfolding of this transformation into a more integrated version of myself, which, whether you're reading spiritual texts or you're reading neuroscience, your potential is about embodying all of you and not leaving anything behind. So yeah, to answer your question, I think that it's compassion really that was the thing that helped me integrate from left to right.
So you talk about compassion a lot, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to speak to you about it.
Mm-hmm.
What is compassion if we were to take it to maybe a definition before we even dive into it further?
Yes. So compassion in the Buddhist sense is showing an awareness of suffering and taking action to relieve that suffering. But when I refer to compassion, this is my own personal experience, and this is what I like to use as a definition, is it's the ability to embrace, enhance, and release any emotional state. So when I talk about compassion, I'm really talking predominantly about self-compassion. Why? Well, because there's dozens of thousands of studies on the benefits, and we can go into a lot of detail, but essentially it's the thing that is lacking most in today's world. And especially one of the reasons why we see the mental health epidemic is due to a lack of self-compassion.
But is that something that, obviously we talk about that self-awareness in that sense, but is that something that people can self-identify? How do we understand that path towards it? Because it could be, in many ways, for people listening, a little bit hard to grasp, because we obviously know the idea of compassion, that warmth that comes with understanding, that self-sense of both awareness and, as you said, release. But it's not something as easy to, let's say, pin on a board and say, this is my level of compassion, or I need to do more of this and be more compassionate in that way.
Sure.
How do we negotiate that or navigate that in an everyday setting for someone listening?
Sure. Yeah, let's talk about this in everyday settings. And, one of the reasons why it has dozens of thousands of studies is because Professor Kristen Neff, whose, work I recommend people check out, she's been able to create the scale. So we can actually measure it.
Right.
And this is what, my clients come and do, and they work through as they see a validated scale that can improve it. So there's this really famous study by Peter Kinderman, and he, in 2013, sent about 30,000 questionnaires out to the BBC to find what's the root cause of mental illness. Is it genetics? Is it traumatic situations? Is it social circumstances? Is it diet? And what do they find, Michael? Well, it's quite astonishing what they found. They found it's down to two things: rumination, or overthinking, and self-blame.
Right.
And so self-compassion it deals with these two and one other thing, but deals with these two things. So in an everyday situation, you might have lost your job, you might have gone through a relationship breakup, you might be struggling with health issues. But what self-compassion helps you do is to separate the person from the performance. So we're allowed to have a human experience. We're allowed to experience struggles, setbacks, pain, suffering. But it gives you the resilience, the optimism, the grit to move forward. And like I say, scientifically proven. I can dive a little deeper into that, but that's a little...
No, that's really fascinating. So I don't know if you know, but on that survey, what kind of questions were being asked to get there?
Great question. I don't know the questions off the top of my head, but, when it comes to looking at etiology or the cause, the root cause, what they're essentially asking is the psychological thought processes. So what they found was, if you can improve your level of self-kindness, this is what they find across all self-compassion studies. So treat yourself like someone you love, okay? And how easy is that to hear about, but actually implement? It's quite challenging, right? Treat yourself like someone you love, that's self-kindness. And rumination or overthinking, the antidote to that is, as you well know, mindfulness or mindful awareness. So, in that study, I think what they find is the etiology is they looked at the respondents' answers to various questions about what they believed that their cause of mental health problems were. And I think ultimately it's all about the self, isn't it? Because if you have a good relationship with the self, if you understand yourself, to quote another really interesting person's work, Martin Seligman. So Martin was the head of the positive psychology movement. He was responsible for probably being the most revolutionary person in psychology from the 70s all the way through. And he created something called a VIA strengths assessment. And he studied a lot of spiritual texts, and he sent out 1 million surveys to the army and various other places in the States to try and gather data on if people knew their strengths, if they had a good relationship with themselves, if they understood the self, what effects that would have on depression. And in his book, Flourish, he talks about how when people know themselves, i.e. they do that VIA strength assessment, takes 15 minutes, they can go into remission from depression for up to 6 months.
Wow.
So if you compare that to antidepressant medications, which have a place, I'm not saying that they don't, that is quite startling results. So to come back to that answer, knowing the self is very, very, very important. I feel like that's what we're all actually here to do, to express our true potential, to share our gifts, to know who we are, to understand who we are. And yeah, I think that self-compassion teaches you that it's not really about the events outside of you, but rather your emotional experience, your day-to-day, that's going to help with your well-being and your growth and your potential.
Do you find that most people just walking around what level of self-awareness do people have?
I'm going to fire that question back at you and ask, what are your thoughts about that one? Because it's a difficult one to measure, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's not something that per se we'd have a measurability on, but more just kind of in your general experience, seeing patients when you used to be a GP, now working with clients or working in a public environment.
Yeah.
What's level of self-awareness are you finding that people come into just everyday conversations with?
Okay, so one thing I will say is I see quite a skewed version of the population, right? So I kind of see, like, when I was a GP, I would see patients who had often been to loads of other GPs, and I love to specialize in mental health. So, and the same thing happens in my world of coaching. Like, I often see people who have been through loads of different self-development. So I'm seeing people who are reasonably self-aware. But here's what I'll say to that, is that there's two ways you can live your life. You either live your life as in everything's connected or nothing's connected. Everything's magical or a miracle, and nothing's a magic or a miracle. And what I find is there's always new levels of self-awareness. If you think about the yogis or the seers or the sages, that when you start to appreciate that. So this great quote from Lao Tzu, right? What's your thoughts, they become your words. What's your words, they become your actions. What's your actions, it becomes your habits. What's your habits, so it becomes your character. And what's your character, it becomes your destiny. So the most self-aware people will be aware of the fact that whatever results they're in at this point in time is only because of that sequence, those thoughts that they're having. And they're continuously doing introspective practices, meditation, journaling, reflection, breath work, yoga, to elevate their level of self-awareness. But I can offer some really simple tools for anyone to start today, because there's a few things that I discovered only quite deep into my journey that have really accelerated things. So.
Great. Before you do that, though, let me ask you a question that's just kind of come into my mind about the relationship between compassion and emotions. How do they sit together, or how do they work together in the way that you kind of use compassion and emotions and understanding how we master those? Great.
So when I talk about emotions, let's actually define what emotions are, right? Because when you're little, I mean, emotions is it defines our human experience. We interact with this world based on our emotional experience, whether you're having a good day or a bad day, whether it's fear, blame, shame, anger, or bliss, love, joy. We define what it is. Well, I like to think of it as a chemical compass, or like your internal GPS system, or you would have heard even chemical feedback. You see these real neutral words to show you that emotions are just guiding you to your purpose, your path, your potential. And that's the most important thing to understand, because when you can do that, you can separate, like we were talking about earlier, events, separations, illnesses, traumas from your emotions. And then you become the observer of your emotions and your thoughts. And that's how you start to master them. Not by always being perfect and happy and blissful, but more understanding the impermanence of them, which I know you'll be akin to it in yoga. So when you understand that it's just a chemical reaction, then you can tap into ways to allow it to be there, to observe it, to accept it, to acknowledge it, without resisting it. And that's a really, really key message, and very difficult as well, because often when we think about our relationship with emotions, I mean, I've got children, you've got little children, and I got a 7-year-old, and he's a lot of fun, Freddie, and he'll come down and we'll say, what are we doing today, Daddy? I say, we're going to the park. Say, no, I want to go to the park. And at that stage, I've realized I'm training him how he's going to respond to his emotions. What's his relationship like? So if I shut him down, then I teach him to suppress emotions. And then what does that do for his body? What does that do from later in life? So, yeah, emotions are often, if we're struggling with something, maybe you're feeling blocked in a relationship or at work or in your health. The first place to start is, how do I feel about this? And improve your emotional vocabulary. That alone, from the neuroscience, when we give a language to our emotions, well, it calms the fear center of our brain, the amygdala response, because, we have our prefrontal cortex responsible for language. Just like I said at the start, when you've got full integration, that's when you get this kind of soothing, calm, peaceful response.
So when we talk about compassion and we talk about the need for self-awareness, how does that differentiate between self-love and self-compassion?
Yes, I'm glad you asked this. Self-compassion has thousands of clinical papers on it. And like I say, it's the ability to embrace, enhance, and release an emotional state. Self-love is about acceptance and growth. But the piece that differentiates self-love from self-compassion is this piece called common humanity, which is the most beautiful principle in all of spirituality and self-development, which says you are not alone, that we're all part of a human experience. And in accepting wherever you are, no matter where you are, as part of a greater whole, that's the differentiating piece from self-love.
So then this begs the question is, where does the ego sit in the conversation with self-compassion?
Great question. So the ego is a social mask we wear, and this gives us a sense of identity, but it's actually a mistaken identity. It's not the real truth of who we are, which is infinite, it's eternal, it's limitless. The ego is where your object of your attention is outside of yourself. So you measure yourself based on your money, your status, your rewards, titles. And it's great when things are going well, but when things aren't going well, it takes a big hit, and that's how you can experience a lot of suffering, a lot of pain, a lot of heartache. Self-compassion, and this is why self-compassion in the literature is so closely linked to resilience, because setbacks are likely, whether you're in business or in a career or in a relationship. Self-compassion teaches you that, you can keep going even in challenging times. You can accept where you are, you can bounce back, and your failures don't define you. They're just part of the human condition.
It's a very important aspect of the stepping stones towards compassion, towards a sense of how we can use our self-awareness to be better in how we become better humans, show up for ourselves, have the capacity for both self-compassion and then empathy for others.
Yeah.
Is that a stepping stone when we start to understand emotions, how we utilize compassion, and then how that becomes an aspect of how empathy is connected in our relationships? Would you put that in a sequence, or would you keep those as separate points for self-mastery, self-awareness?
Yes. So I'm glad you brought up the points about empathy, because what we find is in big studies that humans are naturally empathic, and that's a beautiful thing. And we can even be compassionate, and I'll differentiate between what the two mean in a minute. But we can be compassionate or empathic with others, but actually have a very low level of self-compassion with ourselves.
Right.
And in fact, as Taiwan is specific, there's specific data on Taiwan that shows it's one of the most compassionate countries with other people, but one of the least in terms of self-compassion. And so this is a really, really important point. And I'll just bring in a little analogy, which is, you want to imagine, you will have heard of this phrase, fill your cup. But what people don't understand about that is that, there was a time in my life when I was trying to fill everyone else's cup, and I was burning out as a GP. Mm-hmm. We all know that. And I learned the hard way. I remember once I vomited in the room whilst on the call to a patient because I was just burning the candle at both ends. But when I learned this analogy, which is essentially, you're the champagne glass at the top of the tower. And so when you fill your cup or you overflow with love, that naturally pours out to other people. Problem is with empathy is that it can come without those boundaries, and it can come not from a self-loving place, and which is what was happening with me. It happens to a lot of people in caring professions. So empathy says, I feel you. Compassion says it's my intention to heal you. Empathy is associated with the areas of the brain related to suffering, the insular cortex, whereas compassion, and this is the most startling finding from the Max Planck Institute 2014 study, that compassion is associated with the centers for reward, care, and love. And so the easiest analogy to think about with compassion with others is the mum who gets up for the baby in the night. You know, it's difficult, it's hard, but it is rewarding and soothing and loving, and there's no question whether you're going to do that. They've attended to the suffering, but there's also a reward process of it. And
just on that, sorry, before you carry on that, where's that intersection between reward versus care and love? Because they do seem like polar opposites. They seem like, you know, the self-reward.
Yeah.
You know, mother gets up to care for the baby. Oh, I'm a good mother. I'm doing a good job. I'm a good caretaker or caregiver, versus the selflessness of the action of kindness or of love. Do all those actions for compassion need reward?
It's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. So what's come up for me is dopamine and the dopamine system. So dopamine system, many people have heard this word thrown about these days. Well, it's the only neurotransmitter responsible for our future-focused actions. And it's made in a very, very small area of the brain called the substantia nigra. Anyway, this neurotransmitter is associated with our reward pathways as well. But when is the dopamine systems most heavily overloaded? Well, in love, in romantic love. So I'm not sure. I think reward and love can go together. I feel like, you know, we are loving beings.
Yeah.
You know.
And I do believe that they go together. And I suppose my question comes down to whether or not they can be separated. So for context, let's say in something like a non-clinical or scientific environment, we take a philosophical approach.
Yeah.
If you look at Vedic philosophy, we talk about the actions or the selflessness of our actions, essentially of how you would really start to understand the definition of what true karma is, right? People often think karma is love. People often think, but it's, what goes around comes around. But actually, the true translations is selfless service, righteous action, right? Yes. And then there is those tiers of it, where in the truest tier, you'd have this aspect of it, which is true selfless service, like unconditional support. And that would be the highest form of it. But the reality is as human beings with the human condition, we can't actually operate in that MO purely because our psyche relies on us having some sense of reward. So even if we water it down or dilute it down to the simplest form of you and I are walking out of the door here and I open the door for you, my selfless action of kindness to you, and you walk through it and you don't say thank you, there's a part of me that goes, all right, I need that sense of reward on a fundamental human level of acknowledgement, because that's the way we're programmed as humans, is to have some aspect of reward through all the kindness that we offer. Right? And so it's a really interesting separation. Why I was wanting to pick your brain up, because you do have, let's call it that, medical background, or now your coaching background and your understanding of compassion. That do you find that reward state is always there? Because from my own personal insight, it is in some ways, because we're human.
Yeah. I mean, I think I love that story and that reflection. It's a beautiful thing. I think, and I love the spiritual aspect of it as well, because I was reflecting on this the other day about the law of giving, which aligns quite nicely to what you're saying. I think in terms of reward, if you were to only focus on the direct receiving from your acts of giving, then you're going to come unstuck, right? Because how often does that great story happen? You give a gift to someone, you say a compliment, someone engages with something on your social media and you don't get it back. But, what I found is when you're in a receiving state of gratitude just for the sun rising, the health of our bodies, the things that come for free, the attitude of the gifts that are there, then I think, you naturally you emanate that kind of feeling of reward and Yeah, so I it's a very interesting perspective, and I'm glad you brought it up. I haven't thought of it that way.
Yeah, it's just one of those things, and I think the whole point of the podcast for these conversations is to kind of bring different things to the table and just see where they land. And I think what I really appreciate or find really interesting about your work is that you are really taking it on your shoulders to help to educate and support people in mastering their emotions in a way that helps them become self-sufficient in their own humanity.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of work that is out there where if you come to me, then you need to keep coming back to me for you to get anywhere on a healing path or a progress, as opposed to the space in which we can help be self-sufficient in our own evolution.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you brought that up, because, I was very inspired by people in my journey. I always think the best leaders create leaders. And so that's always the way that I was very inspired by people who had led me at multiple points. And, I think, I'm glad, I'm very grateful that you see that. And I think the other big message, like I said at the start, is that all paths are beautiful paths. Whether you're taking a spiritual path to mastering your emotions, whether you're taking the scientific path, whether you're taking the logical path, I think that that's really important to be aware of. There isn't a right or wrong. As another phrase that says, no emotion is right or wrong. Judgment is a big thing that blocks us. It blocks us from our potential, from our growth, from our true essence. And that's a very hard concept, I would say, for people to grasp, because we're brought up with this sense of right and wrong. It needs to be there. But after a while, it can block our creativity. It can block, how well we feel in ourselves, how optimistic we feel. So yeah, I agree.
So let's maybe do this anecdotally in a bubble, because I think it's important to take concept and context and then put it through application. Yeah. So for someone listening to this, or anyone who's looking for application of how to master emotions, where do you start them? What is our linear path for progress?
Yeah. So what I found is that there's a lot of people out there, and I was learning from a lot of amazing people to help you master your emotions, feel good, help you get into that space of optimism. Some people in the spiritual space may call it high vibe, etc. But what I found was there's a specific sequence, and I personally got very frustrated by taking loads of action without the awareness or without agreeing or acknowledging some really important things beforehand. And so sometimes I would say you can play with this, but actually I would say you're right, there is a sequence, and that you must start with awareness. Awareness is key. So I'm just going to briefly summarize the whole lot. Name it to tame it, feel it to heal it, and then act, don't react, basically. So these are the 3 steps, the 3 A's. I'll go into more detail. So we start off with naming the emotion, and that's why at any point in the day, there was a time when I used to go around, I have a calendar reminder every hour, and we would check in and say, how do I feel in this moment? That alone is incredibly profound. I've got great stories from my clients that, whether they're in board meetings or whether they're creating or writing, you just checking in, you can stop that downward spiral. Because, sometimes you say, I've had a bad week or a bad month. But if you look back honestly and you journaled, you could see the steps. So you're going to name your emotions. And there's 3 core negative emotions that we should be aware of: fear, sadness, and anger. And we're just knowing those 3 core ones. You don't have to say all the other ones, but you can just say, does it feel like fear, sadness, or anger? And then, of course, there's other emotions we can talk about.
How do you find if someone isn't sure how they feel? So they've had, let's call it, they're feeling a sense of frustration.
Yeah.
Let's just call it, got in a little argument at work, 2 people disagreed on whatever the outcome was supposed to be. So obviously there's frustration, and I know it's a very short walk towards fear, sadness, and anger.
Yeah.
But if you're in that state of frustration, and then you kind of go back to your brain and say, well, Nilesh said I had to check in right now. And I'm like, well, let's check in. It seems like poorly timed. But how do we start to make action steps, or how do we have that progress towards how to even name it?
Yeah. So sometimes if you can't get the words out, it's completely okay. Like I say, I've got young kids and their emotional vocabulary isn't always there, and that's cool. So start with the body. And this is a really, really key point. Again, I was talking about integrating all parts of yourself. Someone that's influenced my work is the Hoffman process. They talk about the 4 parts of the self: logical self, emotional self, spiritual self, and the physical self. And most of us are living in our logical self, and we neglect all of the others. Actually, we don't pay attention to how our body feels. And so from meditation and yoga how profound that connection is between mind and body. But also there's another really profound, you like it when I go into the science, right? I can go a bit deeper with this.
Yeah, you can go anywhere, but I suppose my job here is to ask the questions for context for anyone listening who is coming at it from different angles.
Yeah.
And I think it's really helpful. While obviously you and I can have, I suppose, a unspoken understanding of different contexts because of our backgrounds. Sure. I do think it's helpful for the listeners to maybe hear some of the details, because it just is, it gives context that might ask a question that maybe we can get further along if it's explained.
Amazing. So the body, just tune into how heavy or light your body feels. It's as simple as that. If you can't get the emotional vocabulary out, your body should feel light. When you are connected to peace and bliss, and when you're feeling good, you've seen that, like Singing in the Rain clip where people are just dancing on the street. That's your natural state. This is a really important thing for people to understand. Most people are so conditioned, and I was like this too, to their body's just like hunched over, their postures are feeling so heavy, tired. So tune into your body is the number one way to improve your awareness. And over time, right, and it may not be immediately, you'll start to ask the body questions. Like, hey, why do I feel like this? Where am I most tight? And then you might ask why, and you can get intuitive answers. And there's a lot of great research about this as well, how the body keeps the score. Mm-hmm. So start with the body, is that if you can't get the words, how light or heavy does your body feel?
And then where do you go after that? So establishing that baseline of awareness, checking in frequently, then where do we go?
Yeah. So another person that I was really inspired by, and it's interesting because I'm often drawn to doctors who have gone into the personal development space or spiritual space. David Hawkins was one of those. He was a psychiatrist.
Do you think that's a common trend, or that's the exception to the rule?
I think it's the exception. There's Deepak Chopra, there's David Hawkins, there's people who, there's like Joe Dispenza, who wasn't a doctor, but he's also in the health field and self-development. His work is truly stunning. He consulted monasteries and Buddhist and Christian churches, and he said it really profoundly in his book Letting Go, that what you want to do at that stage is, once you're aware of the emotion, you want to understand that there's an energy that sits behind the emotion, and if you sit with it without judgment, with pure acceptance, with just being with it, that over time that will naturally release. And the way you'll know it's releasing is by the lightness of your body. So it's quite a funny thing really, but just being aware of the fact that your body was feeling a bit heavier, then by you, and I like to call it the Chinese finger trap approach, if you can picture that Chinese finger trap, by you actually becoming one with it and coming closer to that emotion and that energy without judging, well, it will release. And so you're probably sitting at home thinking, yeah, sure, Nilesh, like, you don't know how angry and frustrated I am, you don't know the pains I'm going through, the trauma and pain I've been in. And I get that. And so all I would ask you to do is 5%, 1% sitting with it, 5%, slowly over time. And very magical things occur in the long run. And I say long run, it's not actually that long, If you commit to this in a year, your life will be dramatically different. If you're really doing that hourly check-ins and every day you're paying attention. Because like I said, your emotions are a guiding system. So when you are feeling that tension or that disconnection, well, the more you sit with it and release it, the more you're going to be kind of guided to what you love to do. So sit with the emotion, non-judgment, no accepting, and you'll know it works by naturally releasing.
And so in a world where we're intellectually programmed or nurtured into knowing why things happen. Is this one of those ones where don't ask why, just let it be?
As in, why does sitting with it...
Why does sitting with it then alleviate it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a why there. Okay. I think there's a why. Let me have a go. Again, I'm quite fascinated by Buddhist psychology, and Buddhist psychology says all negative emotion stems from a feeling of being separate. And so when you're aware of the emotion, you at that point are separate from the emotional, whatever experience you have. You're frustrated at that person at work. You're frustrated because your position is different to that other person's position. I get it. I've been there. I get that day to day. But the more you kind of become one, which is the essential principle of spirituality across all spiritual traditions, the more you don't resist it and accept it. Well, it makes sense that then the disconnection, the loneliness, the separation you feel dissipates. And that's really the pain. Like, that's the ultimate pain of humans, to feel separate, to feel lonely, to feel like I'm the only one that's experiencing this. So to move on, right, the 3 A's, like we said, name it to tame it, is the awareness piece. The bit we're talking about now is the agreements piece. And this is based on the noble truths of Buddhism, which says that, everyone suffers is the first one. So you realize, although you're maybe experiencing frustration, you're not the only one out there. And that's actually a very heartwarming and connecting thing. And then if you're not the only one, then there are causes and conditions for your emotions, for your suffering, for your experience. And then the last truth is, well, if there are causes and conditions, well, then there's something we can do about it. And this is it. This is what I mean by mastering your emotions. It doesn't mean you feel happy all the time. It means that you accept where you are and you are primed to take action moving forward.
Hi friends, I hope you're enjoying listening to the show. One of the ways that we can keep this pod going in the best possible way is by the help of some of our amazing partners and friends. So if you can give me just a few moments to listen into these ads and messages, it would be so appreciated. Exhale is a choice to take control of your mind and mental health. Welcome to the Just Breathe course for breathwork and meditation, our 6-week program to help you breathe better, reduce stress, and regulate the nervous system. Hi, I'm Michael James Wong, meditation and breathwork teacher and founder of Just Breathe. And my life's work is dedicated to helping as many people as possible quiet the mind using the power of breathwork and meditation. And that's why I created Exhale. This course brings together my 20 years of experience studying, sharing, and teaching these practices in the real world. Inside the course, you'll gain instant on-demand access to over 100+ videos, lectures, technique tutorials, and guided breathwork and meditation practices dedicated to helping you create a personal and powerful ability to respond to any and all of life's big and small stressful moments. In this course, you'll learn my unique perspective and agnostic approach to help quiet the mind and regulate the nervous system. Each week during the course, you'll be invited to join our live Zoom sessions where I'll share and discuss with you both the science and the wisdom of these quiet practices. And even more, I'll be joined by some of the world's most well-respected psychologists and neuroscientists to help us understand even further. We'll talk about the nuances of stress, the science of stimulation and how we regulate the nervous system, and how to rewire your brain for the better. And what I love most about this course is you're not just joining me, you're joining a community of like-minded people all around the world who are dedicated to learning more, building their personal practice, and understanding how to use breathwork and meditation to change our lives for the better every single day. As a reminder, you'll get on-demand and lifetime access to the course material. You'll have access to 100+ video lectures, techniques, and practices. And you'll have 6 weeks of live talks and lectures and learnings with me on breathwork and meditation. You'll have 3 amazing talks with some of the world's most well-respected psychologists and neuroscientists. And you'll become part of our global Just Breathe community. So join us on the journey as we take control of our mind and mental health. Welcome to Exhale. The course is now open. See you on the inside. It's a really interesting conceptual, existential conversation around awareness, around how we deal with suffering, how we have these experiences. Because what's really interesting, and especially on this podcast, is we have all kinds of conversations that, let's call it skew left, as in left brain, or skew right, right brain. And I think this is a really fascinating one because we can approach it from both sides. But, as you know, and as listeners know, my background as well comes from a meditation or mindfulness background, a traditional practice of wisdom. And there's always an understanding that we have the wisdom and the insights within us to allow us to move through any of the challenges that we have in the human condition. Obviously, there's going to be scientific evidence or proof or insight that's going to support that or work against it. And I think one of the things that's really interesting that kind of, for me, encapsulates this a little bit, it's kind of that thing when we look at how self-awareness breeds us towards an aspect towards compassion, which gives us this space in which we can release judgment, heal our sense of wounds or the aspects of us that aren't feeling whole, or the sense, or the disconnect to the self. There tends to be this intellect that always says, but why? Why do I feel like that? Why was I lonely? Why was I mistreated? Why do I lack trust? All those things that almost we feel like if we have answers, our mind says if we have answers to those, then inevitably it's going to resolve it. When the reality is, while we can always look for answers and dive into it, and obviously we have psychotherapy practices, support resources for that, there is an aspect from, let's call it from a spiritual perspective or from a wisdom perspective, that the line that we walk or that we navigate towards needing an answer versus just allowing ourselves to be aware without judgment, to let go, to heal, to move forward, is powerful in its own merit without having the context or the intellectual understanding. Yes. There's a quote that I read the other day, which was, it said something, I'll paraphrase because I'm just remembering in the moment, is, it's like getting bit by a snake, and instead of just focusing on healing the snake bite, you chase after it, asking the snake why he bit you. Right? And when you talk about like that, it's a funny anecdote, but it paints a picture of, sometimes I feel like perhaps we're chasing an answer that's not needed or isn't there, which is distracting us from moving forward to our own resolution or our well-being.
Correct. I love that. That essentially you're saying that the questions are coming from a place of resistance, which is like you're pushing away. Like, I don't want to experience this. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Yeah,
and I hear that a lot as well when I speak to a lot of, let's say, the clinical therapists that come on to the podcast, or people who have that background where it's about looking into the past, looking at the traumas, looking at your childhood, looking at things that you've experienced that have brought you here. And obviously those have huge merit, really important. That work is necessary. But what I do appreciate as well is perhaps, and again, not to paraphrase your work, is that as a coach, it's about what we do now. Yes. Not how do we resolve what's been done.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Let's talk about coaching, because I think there's been a huge explosion in this space.
Yep.
I'm grateful for that. But I have my own definition from working with various coaches and listening to them and looking at the data. And so I'd like, remember the 3 Ds. Mm-hmm. So self-discovery, self-development, and decision-making. And usually people who come in for coaching, they have a future dream, a future vision, a mission, or maybe their mission is to create a mission. And they're going on this journey of self-discovery because, of course, your goals are not about what you get. It's about who you become in the process.
Yeah.
But it's also mapped very clearly with decisions that you make moving forward. We're infinite choice makers. I love that. It's from Deepak Chopra. And we make about 30,000 decisions a day. So if you think about the power of that, you think about the power of one decision. It's like a sliding doors moment in the movie. And that's how we've seen all these amazing stories. The other day, one of my clients especially said that they got engaged. I've had people sell paintings to the Ukraine war. I've had people win, charity founders win awards from the Prime Minister, all kinds of things because of increased awareness and then a new decision. And that's coupled with the self-development. And it's therapy has its part. Therapy is more about mental illness, anxiety, depression, maybe physical health elements that are related to psychology, whereas coaching tends to be from a place where there isn't any kind of therapeutic treatment of medical conditions, although you may well have coexisting things, of course, and it's more about your potential, which is, again, why you've heard me speak so much about connecting all parts of you, integrating all parts of you, because that's how your potential is expressed.
So remind me again, self-discovery,
decisions, and self-development.
Self-development and decision.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's a really nice framework of it. And I do think that more and more in the well-being conversation, there is space for all of these conversations. And I think it's very easy to quickly sit on one side of the fence saying, we need to look at this, or we need to look at this, we have this approach and that approach. Do you find that with some of your clients or the people that you work with as a coach, that they often or sometimes are working in tandem with therapy? Or is it more like working with a coach or working into self-discovery and self-development is a step after?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's one thing, that you can choose your own path. I've got some amazing clients that have done coaching first and then therapy second. I've got some that have done therapy first and coaching second. I have had one or two people that we've done it together, but often the process I do is quite intensive and quite I would recommend that people put their full focus on it, because the results tend to be better. So I ask them to choose, but the results are better when they fully focus on one approach. And actually, that's probably my biggest self-reflection from all the self-development I've been in, is choose. It came from medicine, right? I started to notice that the treatments that work best are the ones that both the patient and the doctor believed in. Choose someone that you believe in. Choose someone that you feel connected to. That alone is very, very powerful. Someone that fully sees, fully hears you. If that's a therapist, great. If that's a coach, great. But if you really find that, and again, how do you know? You feel it in your body after a while. Just feel calm in their presence. Your nervous system's calm. You know, you share things you wouldn't have usually shared. You'll be very, you'll make bigger decisions and go for bigger dreams and take bigger risks. So, yeah.
I like that, and I think it is really important. I'll be guilty of this, of pulling us a little bit away from our original plan of action, of really walking that line of what are the steps towards really mastering your emotions, putting these things into play.
Sure.
We talked about self-awareness, that need for establishment, whether it's journaling, self-reflection, those types of things.
Yeah.
Carry on there with this.
So we do the 3 A's. So just remember this framework: awareness, agreements, actions. So we did the name it to tame it, checking in the body. I'll go through that in a little bit more detail at the end. And then we did the 3 agreements, the Buddhist agreements. Sorry. Now we're on to the action bit, which is the bit everybody knows. But I would say that it's the bit that's most misunderstood, i.e. people are trying to act from a place of lack, from a half-full cup. And again, people also, they act without really tuning into their own inner wisdom, which is why I would strongly encourage everybody to start this journey today, that I can list 20 different practices, but it may be that you putting your feet in the earth is the one thing that helps you come back to center. And I don't need to recite scientific studies. If that works for you, boom, that's your thing, great. So what I would ask you to do, I spoke about the Hoffman process, and I call them the authentic awareness questions. So what does my body need? So what do I need is the essential question of self-compassion, right? And it comes from when you're a kid, you had all your needs met. Now it's time for you to meet your own needs, and that's a very powerful thing. So what does my body need? What does my logical mind need? What does my emotional self need? I can go in more detail. What does my spiritual self need? So the emotional self, you'll often find, when you're kind of binging on crisps and chocolates and sweets, right? That's because the emotional self hasn't been loved. You hear Steve Peters in the Chimp Paradox talk about that as the chimp or the limbic brain. Well, if you're feeling like you're craving those things, it means that you haven't played enough. You haven't had enough fun. So you just ask yourself, what does my inner child need? What does my emotional self need? Great example of this, when I was little, I used to sing for hours in my bedroom. So I have a routine, I have songs that I rap to, songs that I sing to, put it on whilst I'm doing the dishwasher, after I've had a difficult conversation or something. It's the emotional self. Logical self, for me, a big one is reading. again, anything that stimulates your logical mind. You could be a puzzles guy. You could be somebody that's into, anything that's going to engage your intellect. To be honest, most people do quite a lot of this, so they're not too underrepresented there. The higher self or the spiritual self, this, I personally love this. This is where you might do a meditation. You might visualize a colored light, a liquid light that fills you up from head to toe. It's famously done in a lot of loving kindness type meditations. This again has a lot of science behind it. And then what does my body need? Exercise, nutrition, hydration. These things are very, very powerful. I need to go into that. But you can just ask yourself from this kind of framework of actions, emotional, logical, spiritual, physical, what do I need? And you'll find your secret source. One more thing I'm just going to add, and I alluded to it. You'll often find when you were little and you were in solitude between the ages of, let's say, 3 and 10 years old, that there will be things that you naturally were drawn to doing. Singing was one of them for me. Another one for me was putting my feet in the earth. And so you can think of the 4 elements, right? So fire, water, earth, wind. And you can ask yourself, when I was little, which one resonated with me? Did I used to sit by the fire? Did I used to love spending time in the bath? Did I used to put my feet in the earth? Did I like being outside in nature? You know the answers. And when you do, then, you found your secret source for feeling calm and present in the moment.
I'll tell you a funny story right now. My kids are 2. I've got twin boys. And it's that thing where when you look at them, or when you watch them exist, they have those soothing things that work for them. And when you were saying that, it's just funny because it sparked in my brain. One of my boys, who shall remain nameless, so this doesn't come back to him later in life, is he's at the age where if he's getting a little bit stressed out, as if things aren't going his way, or the square peg's not fitting in the round hole, his kind of mechanism for soothing or feeling reconnected is he just likes to get naked and then put stickers all over himself, and then it makes him laugh and he dances around, and all of a sudden a minute later he's back and he's himself again. It's those kind of things, and I'm not advocating this as an adult, or maybe I am, we'll see. But it's that thing of remembering the things that work for you and doing that, because it's like that thing where a lot of times as we get older, we forget. We often talk about in wisdom practices, we tend to forget the things that make us happy as we get older. As adults, we don't necessarily have hobbies like we did as children. We don't necessarily do things just for the sake of them because they're fun. We have functions. We have things that has ROI. We have this that leads to this because that's due, or we read books because we want the knowledge, or we draw pictures because we're trying to paint a picture to give to someone. Everything is reward-based. Everything has an ROI. But yes, as we get older, all of our childhood hobbies or things that we just did purely because they were fun or interesting or ridiculous, we forget, right? And it is that thing of remembering. Maybe first it's remembering what you used to do, because it's a relatively easy recall. What did you do when you were a kid? Oh, you played sports, or you like to dance, or you like to sing, you played an instrument. It's that funny thing is a lot of times, a lot of people who played an instrument when they were younger don't play instruments anymore when they're older. They still can. I've got so many friends that you go out, you go to a pub and there just happens to be a piano there, and 1 out of 5 friends will jump on the piano, and all of a sudden you've got a live band going on. And it's that thing where when that happens, it's also the case that person usually says, I haven't played piano in years. That's it. That's right? Yeah. And it's that thing of getting back to remembering what innately serves us, supports us, and makes us feel good, and giving ourselves the permission to do that without a need for reward. Nilesh, thank you so much for the conversation. It's been really interesting to, let's say, start off talking about what our emotions are, how compassion works, and have this framework that I think is really supportive, that puts us, let's say, ends with action but doesn't start with it. Yeah. And I think that is a big testament to anyone's self-discovery or development work. And I think it's actually, it's a good point to make that I think too quickly we talk about it as self-development work, right? Because the category is been popularized that way. But it very much is self-discovery work with development. It's a bit like we have to remember that without the discovery, there is no development, because if we don't know where we are now, there's no way of knowing where we're going. Exactly. And so maybe there's a petition to say, let's recategorize it as self-discovery work. But it is that sense. It's all of these things that we're talking about is helping us to master our emotions, giving us the opportunity to be more self-aware, to make choices, to move with intention. That gives us maybe the tools or the possibilities to move forward in a meaningful way.